Okay, today we are looking at the discourse theory, which is the very important facet of the psychoanalytic work and practice. It is also quite crucial to understand if you want to practice spiritual development, because it kind of envelops different modalities of social bond, basically, different ways of social relations that exist, and discourse theory formalizes that. So when we can see that, we can, well, not engage with these discourses, perhaps, if you don't want to get involved with the world, because that's opposite to spiritual practice. Not to say that within the context of spiritual practice there cannot be involvement with the world. Of course there can be. But if the latter overrides the former, well, that's no longer spiritual practice, isn't it? So if you want to see and understand clearly what under what currents of discourse the world operates. So, in my opinion, Lacanian discourse theory is quite a good tool for that. So let us look at the elements of discourse, which can be formalized as follows. We have an agent, which addresses the other. And that's basic communication, isn't it? Basic two elements which are needed for the discourse to exist, for social bond to exist. But this relation is already marked by so-called disjunction of impossibility. And what does this involve? Well, the message which agent says to the other doesn't ever reach the destination. Why? Well, because the other already perceives that message through their own filters. So that as a result, they misunderstand what has been communicated. And yeah, one would say that clear communication is possible, but inherent filters due to differences of subjective structures are such that not quite. There is always the element of unsaid or misunderstood within the other. If you really go into it, you know, if you really examine your interactions with others, you know that what you really want to say doesn't quite reach the others, in the same way perhaps that you don't quite get what others want to communicate to you, precisely because of this disjunction of impossibility. This address of the agent doesn't provoke reciprocity as a result. Hence there is no returning arrow from the other. There is only arrow to the other. The way they connect is via the other means. Agent's actions are motivated by the hidden truth. And that truth is, of course, well, in each discourse is going to be different, because components of the discourse, which are divided subject, master signifier, knowledge, and object A, will rotate along this over these four positions, and we're just about to indicate the fourth position. So anyhow, this truth at the base of our agent's address also affects the other, hence we have this arrow here. How it affects the other? Well, subliminally, of course, unconsciously. This is another reason why the other doesn't quite get the message, because certain unconscious undercurrent influences that, like a underlying frequency which corrupts the message to a certain extent. Yet, the agent's address to the other has an effect, and that's the product. The product. The product doesn't quite satisfy that which agent addressed the other with. Hence we have the disjunction of importance, or the absence of rapport, so-called non-rapport. Why? Well, because the product doesn't correspond to the truth which motivated agents address. Hence, there is no arrow from the product to the truth as well. However, the product in turn influences the agent back because, well, that which is produced going to produce more discourse. Why? Well, precisely because product is important to satisfy the truth or to answer to the truth. Hence, it will produce more address of the agent to the other, and hence the whole repetition will ensue. This is how discourse rotates. Discourse is something that is set in motion and it persists. This arrow indicates the truth affects the agent, and this arrow indicates that product is happening via the interaction with the other. Yeah. This influence of the product to the agent, well, this is the vector of desire. This engenders more desire. Yeah, fueling more desire. Desire then repeats and fuels more discourse. Yeah. So, another way how this can be written is as follows. Discourse exists on the condition that there is someone who puts themselves into a position of addressing agent, yeah, and that's the position in relation to the other. This position is not the truth as indicated here, because it's already fabricated, isn't it? When we address someone else, we already assume a certain stance, yeah, a certain persona, and that persona differs depending to whom we interact, isn't it? And depending on which circumstances we interact. Hence, we can write that this agent is a semblance. Is a semblance. It is not real, it's fictitious, yeah? Because it doesn't correspond to the truth. It's assumed. So what does semblance treat in the other? Well, either in the other or in oneself as the other, because if we follow the logic of the unconscious, we are the discourse of the other on the level of the unconscious. And if we treat that on the level of the other, what we treat in is response. Same as we communicate. Semblance aims to treat the jouissance in the other. Yeah. So we assume certain persona in order to get a hold of the drive, either of the other or of our own. This jouissance is, of course, a disruptive dimension of ourselves and the other, and it undermines the conscious thinking that it is in charge agency of the ego. And it undermines the self-sufficiency of this enjoying ego. So, discourse is what? It's the use of language, isn't it? It's applying linguistic signifiers in order to treat jouissance. But that treatment, as we have discussed in lectures on the subject of the unconscious, doesn't quite get to the point of jouissance, doesn't it? Instead, it creates a certain articulated beyond. And that, of course, refers to the real, isn't it? And, well, that produces corporeal tension. So the more we treat the otherness of the other and jouissance of the other with the words, the more real is produced. As Lacan famously states, it does not stop not being written, despite our trying to write it down or say it. it still persists. Every time the jouissance is treated, a dose of corporeal tension arises, which leads to a product of surplus jouissance. Here, of course, the arrows are the same. Truth also affects jouissance, as well as surplus jouissance affects the semblant because of its surplus, isn't it? But what's interesting that happens here in this treatment of jouissance with words, and then in return just surplus jouissance, excess of jouissance affecting the agent or speaking subject, or speaking semblant, which subject assumes in order to address oneself to the other, is a certain fetishizing arises. I think I have misspelled it. It has to be just F, isn't it? Fetishizing. Why? Well, because through words we ascribe to that which is blunt, corporeal, real, a certain enigmatic value. And this is here that the vector of fantasy or delusion comes into the picture. And that's precisely what binds jouissance in whatever subjectivity, fantasy in erotic subjectivity, delusion in psychotic subjectivity, etc., the low and perverted, and for autists order to be enjoyed. But still as the level of kind of symptomatic treatment of jouissance. So that aspect of fetishizing that which is quite ordinary, really. What is corporeal tension? It's no big deal. It was sexual excitation. It's no big deal, really, if you just look at it, but we can't just look at it, isn't it? We can't just look at it in the other. It is disturbing for us for some reason. Well, because we don't see clearly, we see through the filters. It's for the same reason the other also perceives us through the filters. And so that which is real, blunt, and ordinary is perceived as enigmatic and, well, anxiety-provoking and whatever. However, the other fast of it is that it also allows us to deal with jouissance, because when we can see it in that way, we can also see absurdity in it, isn't it? Absurdity in our fascination with this corporeality, which in turn brings laughter. And precisely in our capacity to laugh off, and that's the great quality of discourse, that can be humorous interaction between two people, can lead to certain resolution and light-hearted laughter. In that laughter, what is accepted is lack. Lack pertaining to our existence, pertaining to the real of dukkha, pertaining to dissatisfactoriness of phenomena. And through this, one can access symbolic castration, thus moving away from jouissance and towards desire. Desire along this vector. However, this is complex schema, isn't it? So a lot of things can go in various ways. Variability is the big deal here. Now let us look how these four elements placed in these four positions can create initially four discourses, but then we add the fifth discourse, the capitalist discourse, which is the variation of master's discourse, but we'll come to that. First, what needs to come to the picture is the master's discourse. That is going to vouchsafe the consistency of the symbolic order or not, because as we know, in certain fusion type subjectivities, that doesn't happen due to foreclosure of the master's signifier. It's not to say that the psychotics or perverts cannot use master's discourse. They can via their own self-forged version of the master signifier within the delusional system or within the perverted law. any subject can use any discourse. That's the structural distinction. So, master's discourse. In the master's discourse, in the position of the truth, we have divided subject. In the position of the agent, we have a master signifier, which da, you would guess. And the master signifier treats the other who is supposedly possessor of knowledge, which is, of course, hypothetical attitude within the master discourse. And that's already quite saying a lot in regards to master discourse. It is supposed that the other knows, but not in the hysterics the subject supposed to know way, but in the way that the other is subject to certain rules and regulations, and they are completely and fully in control of their desire and their subconscious, which is, of course, nonsense, because everybody is influenced by the unconscious in the ways which are, well, exceeding the conscious agency of the ego. So, master's discourse presupposes that subjective division doesn't exist in the others to a certain extent. At the same time, subjective division within the one who articulates oneself from the position of the master signifier is sort of suppressed. It's under there. So as a result, what is produced is more lack, more of the unconscious is produced, because more of the object A is produced, more subjective discontent arises, which of course is going to kick back onto the one who uses master signifier, and already inherent internal discontent gonna be reflected on the other. So in this discourse, master signifier is imposed on the other, who is supposed to act in accordance with the knowledge. What is this knowledge? Legislative forms, codes of conduct within the companies, etc. Legislation of the country is the best example ever, really. So what government does, uses master's discourse, domineeringly prescribes or orders laws upon their subjects. That's it. Boss in the organization uses master's discourse in order to treat their subject who act in accordance with a code of conduct of a given organization. And nobody questions the fact that the boss's unconscious is also repressed. As a result, the other is reduced to an object, placed in the position of lack, which is going to fuse further discontent, and that's what we see. Employees are addressing the bosses for whatever reasons. So country citizens are constantly pissed off about the government and its decisions. That's simply inherent within the structure of the master's discourse. However, in regards to the structure of subjectivity, master's discourse must come into the picture in order to vouchsafe, well, name of the father, or paternal metaphor. Paternal metaphor. Or if it doesn't happen and the name of the father is foreclosed, delusional metaphor must come into being. And what is delusional metaphor in case of psychotic? It's precisely assuming a certain position of mastery over the elementary phenomena and decomposition of the body and return of the rejected in the real. In any way, master discourse got to be there. This is what vouchsafes consensus reality. Consensus reality depends on the master's discourse, isn't it? On the structure and quality of the master signifier within the discourse. So what do we have in regards to psychotic or autistic speech, in this case? Well, it is outside consensus reality. Yeah, it's the self-forged form of articulation. However, even within this form of articulation, any other discourse can be used, depending on the way how the other is treated by a subject who articulates themselves. And last moment to understand that master discourse is impotent in regards to transcending the subjective division, because it's already pre-existingly suppressed by the master discourse. And it's impossible to resolve the discontent because master discourse produces more discontent. It kind of orders executively phenomena at a given moment, and then things change and the new ordering is required. Hence, legislative apparatuses of the countries are never going to be out of work. And as a result of the master's discourse impotence is that other discourse become possible. So what are the other discourses? Well, first of all, hysterics discourse. And that's the direct antithesis to the master's discourse in some way. Hysterics discourse. And hysterics discourse is cool. Lacan certainly spoke fondly of hysterics discourse. In the position of agent, we have divided subject here, which is kind of more honest, isn't it, in regards to how human psyche functions. Whereas the truth that fuels the meta is the discontent. Again, more sincere in some ways. Divided subject addresses the master. 4 answers, 4 knowledge. Yeah. Active formulation of discontent searches for the bearer of the complete knowledge in regards to jouissance. At the same time, the truth of the meta is the lack, which supports desire, and it is repressed, which is, of course, affecting the master straight away, or the master signifier, or the bearer of knowledge, putting them into the position of the subject supposed to know. That's where it occurs. And that is what forces, on the level of the drive, if the subject is not careful, the subject which is put in the position of the one supposed to know, not careful, to produce continuous answers, to produce knowledge, to procure knowledge, which produces more narratives. However, these narratives, due to lack of reciprocity between the product and the truth, do not really solve the problem of the hysteric and affect discontent even more, setting the discourse in motion. Thus, hysterics require ever more so knowledge. So the address to the master doesn't ever stop. We can see it on the level of, I don't know, search for knowledge, search for truth, search for one and complete answer for discontent. Especially it is evident in the spiritual scene. One goes to that guru, to this guru, that master, or that shifu, to this monk, to that venerable, whatever. And if they are operating under hysterics discourse and having, hysterics discourse is very much correlative with the hysteric structure, isn't it? And if they're operating under that, well, they're gonna keep on going from master to master and never finding the answer, castrating one master, changing for another. That's simply how it rolls. However, hysterics are in this way agents of progress. And that's what Lacan had empathy for them for. Due to this continuously produced discontent and address for knowledge, this demand for knowledge is created. And that's how human societies, populations, well, progress to a certain extent. So that's hysterics discourse. Now, let us look at the university discourse. Our third discourse. And the university discourse is a kind of obsessive version of the discourse. There is no such thing as an obsessive discourse, but university discourse comes close. So we have, in the position of the agent, we have knowledge this time. because knowledge is what is done in the universities, isn't it? People are searching for knowledge, formulating knowledge, developing knowledge, and in a certain extent kind of answering for the demand of the previous discourse, of the hysterics discourse. And the position of the latent truth is the master signifier. And that exemplifies tacit relationship between the university discourse and the master's discourse. In a way, university discourse is what supports the master's discourse. Here we have kind of university and government working together. In what way? Well, because a master signifier of the someone who proclaims their mastery in a power relationship, subjugating others, is supported by the knowledge produced in the university. It is present there, but it's not articulated. Yeah. And that knowledge treats the other as object. Yeah. As the object A, object cause of desire, or as disorganized mesh of the real, if you like, which needs to be treated with knowledge. What it produces, of course, you might have guessed, subjective division. Yeah. This discourse rests on certain dogmas and assumptions which are rigid, and you only need to go to the university to know how it is so. And it's bound to produce discontent, of course, because treating the other as object ultimately gonna turn the other who operates from the position of the self-mastery of the ego into divided object. Of course, the other treated by the university discourse straight away understands that it's not just flexibility of knowledge that is being explored here, but actually definitive injunction of the domineering master signifier which underlines it. Yeah. There is no really liberty of knowledge in the universities. Not really. And of course, the discourse has to be set in motion because subjective discontent, and that's the hysterization, isn't it? Hysterics operate from this position, and they're gonna demand for more knowledge, and hence it's gonna rotate. The famous further research is required is precisely this here. So it rotates. Now, there are certain knowledges and certain desires which are inherent to each discourse, and I haven't yet mentioned them. Let us maybe do so. Before we get to the analyst's discourse and the capitalist discourse, which I, in fact, want to discuss in great detail, because to a certain extent, master's discourse, university discourse, hysteric discourse are known. They are that which operates on the level of conventional reality most often seen. Legislation arrives, subjects are subjugated, creating more discontent. They address supporters of the master signifier, that is knowledge producing universities, for answers. That produces yet more discontent. Perhaps things go out of hand, more legislation is required, etc. So cancellous reality rotates in that way. The analyst's discourse, which we're going to look at now, does something else. But before that, let us make maybe a little chart. Knowledge. Enough. Discourse. Knowledge. Desire. So in the master's discourse, the knowledge is the knowledge of injunction. It's prescriptive and definitive knowledge. It's a kind of executive decision type of knowledge. It's not really a knowledge, it's the order. It's the fabricated confidence. That's what it is. It's injunction. Executive decision, injunction. And desire, of course, is desire for power and control. Power, control, subjugation of others, the others who are supposed to understand. In the Hysterics discourse, we have knowledge of the search for knowledge. Hysterics get good at it because what this view is fueled by, well, unsatisfiable desire, as you remember from the hysteric subjectivity. Unsatisfiable desire is what runs the show, hence the more knowledge is thought after. And in university discourse, we have knowledge which supports the master signifier, which supports this executive knowledge, and it elaborates and nuances the master's knowledge. So here, as you can see, the proclamation of the master's injunction is nonsensical to a certain extent, and that's the quality of the S1. Oh, shit. S1. This S2, elaboration and nuancing of the S1, which kind of enables it to make sense. And here you can see how this fabrication of sense or meaning is created. Anything can be made sense of. Delusional metaphor illustrates it very well. Psychotics make sense out of anything. This is how that operates on the level of consensus reality. Well, arguably we have certain formidable truths in relation to science, which this reality stands on. And they are agreed upon, I don't know, laws of Newtonian physics or quantum mechanics, or whatever other quite solid hard science knowledges that are there, that cannot be disputed to a certain extent. They just operate, they're fact. Maybe, well, if you put the academic discourse under the aegis of the master's discourse, the truth of the master signifier would be, there is suffering. Elaborations through S2 would be perhaps drawing a chart of dependent origination and showing how it is so. Yeah. And that's cool. But at the same time, any kind of injunction proclaimed out of the master's discourse can be elaborated upon as well. We have some kind of sect which proclaims whatever nonsensical idea they may in order to gain power and control. That can be elaborated, and this elaboration by those who elaborate is fueled by desire for recognition. This is often seen in the universities circles where people are fighting for grants and whatever other funds they want to be recognized by the funding bodies, want to be recognized for their whatever thesis, for their research, for anything else. Recognized by what? By those who are in power and control to give money, status, whatever. That's how university discourse operates at this level. Notwithstanding, quite pronounced part of the university discourse is the aggressiveness. And I would say aggressive rivalry, kind of akin to sibling rivalry in the family, where they fight for the recognition of the parent. Similar to that extent, naive, yet, oh well. So, we shall add more to this. Now let us look at the analyst's discourse and how that is formed. And that kind of didn't exist. Well, it did within other institutions, like proper spiritual practice. This discourse did exist. Especially it's evident in things like Zen or whatever, the traditions which kind of encourage the inquiry. Yeah. Analyst discourse is that which can inquire into the predicaments of the other three, well, four, including capitalist one, and kind of bring out the internal unconscious dimension of their functionality, which is what we are doing now. All this knowledge is brought about via the effort of analyst discourse and through the application of analysts or analytic knowledge, which we are going to look at in a moment as well. In the position of the agent within analytic discourse is object A. The analysts put themselves in the position of object cause of desire, but not in a perverted or psychotic way. We'll get back to that. And the truth, which is at the basis, is knowledge. Notice not any other discourse had knowledge in the position of truth. Here it was divided subject, here it was object cause of desire, and here it was, in fact, master signifier, not the knowledge itself, in the position of the truth. Here knowledge is operational, yeah, but the truth itself is kind of undisputable and rigid, injunctional. But only here the knowledge, which is something that is born of experience, yeah, isn't it? Born of praxis, something which is flexible and fluid, which can change and can adapt, rather than rigid injunction. That knowledge is at the basis. Within psychoanalysis, this is the knowledge regarding psychopathology, psychic structures, subjective structures, and the therapeutic process. But the fact that it's here in the position of the truth, which is not articulable, indicates that this knowledge is consciously put aside. An analyst doesn't proclaim this knowledge like a university professor does. Yeah, an analyst holds it at the back of their mind, and they proclaim something else. They proclaim their interpretations and punctuations, pointing out at subjective division within the other, trying to bring that to the fore, because, as we have seen, pretty much in any subjectivity, the division is denied, isn't it? Hysteric is denied, obsessive is denied, fusion type subjectivity is definitely denied. And analytic discourses aim to bring that to the fore in order to produce subjective truth in regards to desire. So, once again, to recap, putting oneself in the position of the lack in gender and desire brings forth subjective division in the other. And that is articulated via freely associative speech. Yeah. In order to emphasize the singularity of the other, analyst's knowledge is constantly put aside. We do not want to give neurotics any signifiers whatsoever, any traits of personality, any preferences, any biases, whatever, because they would be ever so keen to identify with that. Yeah. And hence get alienated in the persona of analyst. But that's not given. This knowledge is present there, and it tacitly affects the subject, understand, but not directly. So, and precisely this, putting the conscious knowledge of the analyst aside, allows for production of the master signifier by the subject for themselves. So they can assume their own set of key signifiers which are going to engender the desire for themselves. They can formulate their own version of the master's discourse. However, this can in turn fuel analyst's position as an object cause of desire and make the analytic process interminable. Again, only due to the fact that analysts may enjoy the position they are being put in the position of subject supposed to know and hold on to it. And this is why we gotta now look at the analytic knowledge and what does that entail. I will get rid of this for a moment. Analytic knowledge. By the way, we gotta be including it here as well. And within analytic discourse, knowledge is that of the unconscious. Unconscious knowledge. Yeah. This knowledge is not the paranoid knowledge of the mirror stage. It's not the hysteric knowledge for the search of knowledge. It's neither university knowledge or scientific knowledge. It's the knowledge which arises for any given subject in the process of freely associative speech, which is true for them, dislodging their unconscious formations. It produces master signifiers not based on authority, but based on the elaboration of the unconscious, which makes these master signifiers true for the given subject. Desire, in the case of analytic knowledge, is enigmatic. And it's not just desire, it's desirousness. Desirousness. Analysts embody the desirousness as such. This is what Lacan articulated via the figure of Socrates, who was a kind of agalma, which is the statue, whatever, in Greek. A shining, bright embodiment of desire itself, or at least for someone like Alcibiades, if you look at the Plato's writings in regards to Socrates' symposium, conversations with his disciples. In the same way, analysts embody desire as such, continuously bringing it to the forth, which is a result of their personal analysis, of course. So let's look again what analytic knowledge is not. Not scientific knowledge or textbook knowledge. Not to say that analysts don't refer on any kind of written knowledge. One only needs to open Lacan and be blown away by the extent of the erudition of that man. How much stuff he brings out from all sorts of sources. And that's what differs analytic knowledge from, say, capitalist knowledge, which is solution-producing knowledge. And because it's a solution-providing knowledge, it's specialized. Within capitalist discourse, it's only permissible to be specialized. It's not permissible to be all-rounder, addressing different fields of knowledge for necessary elements. Psychoanalysis uses knowledge arbitrarily, sort of in a utilitarian way, in a way when it is appropriate. We can pull out some concepts of cybernetics or from semiotics or from philosophy or whatever, as long as they are workable or make it, or render the situation workable for the analysis or for the analytic discourse. This is not ego knowledge of the mirror stage. Ego is always ready to say, I know because I am. Yeah, sure. Not quite. That which underlies the ego, the other that speaks despite the ego, is not there. Yeah, not in that discourse. But within analytic discourse is precisely that other side, other scene is thought or sought out. Relevant to spiritual practice is not. It's not the tradition. I already said no, isn't it? Not tradition. Say we can appropriate the whole of the Tipitaka within Buddhism and articulate ourselves from the position of that, having completely ignored our own subjective division. And that's what people do within these traditions. They put that knowledge instead of themselves. Yeah? As if making that knowledge act in proxy for themselves. Yeah? Kind of prepossessing the unconscious. Trying to substitute unconscious for that knowledge, which is not going to happen because unconscious is simply going to be more. It's going to increase the amount of unconscious due to that such a forceful symbolization, which doesn't quite dislodge the effect. In fact, it's not a hysteric knowledge. It's definitely not a hysteric unknowing, which comes in form of childhood amnesia. It's neither obsessive knowing, which comes in the form of ignoring, yeah? Obsessive robs the representation of the repressed content of its affectivity, of its content. It ignores obsessive thoughts and doubts their significance. Yeah, that doesn't matter. The obsessive would say, yeah, why you have the trouble, kind of these things and obsessive thoughts, compulsive actions keep visiting you. Yeah, I'm fully in control. That's what obsessive would say, and that's their form of knowledge. Well, hysteric's knowledge would be that of forgetting and trying to search for obstinately keeping the forgotten as such, as forgotten. And well, to just be clear, that's not ignorance proper or the passion for unknowing, like a forceful, determined passion not to know. And it's definitely not analytic knowledge. Analytic knowledge is seeking to know, but seeking to know the unconscious truth. So what analytic knowledge is knowledge based on luck, or knowledge of luck. First of all, the luck, the subjective division, is brought to the forth. It is operational. It is where the analytic situation is navigated from. Yeah? The knowledge pertaining to the real of dukkha is there as arresting quality of reality. It is the experience of unconscious, which psychoanalysis is responsible for discovering. Experience of the unconscious, or the manifestation of the unconscious. It is the knowledge which accepts luck. Yeah? It occurs via positive transference. When somebody experiences, somebody being analysant, transferential love feelings towards the analyst. It occurs via the correct method of analysis. It occurs via analyst's refusal to operate under S2. Yeah. which is the analytic knowledge. That knowledge is consciously put aside, as you remember. So what manifests during the transference is as the analysand responds to the analyst's desire for free association and punctuation, stuff like that, and to continue analysis. What emerges via the correct method, which is not to be idealized or to be loved as a subject supposed to know by the analysand. All of that produces S1. Like I'm gonna reiterate, I guess. Positive transference, which congeals in response to analyst's desire and not latched onto by the analysts themselves through their being idealized by the analysand, as the subject supposed to know, results in the analysands producing their own ideal set of signification for themselves. Yeah. This is the basis for cure. This is in psychoanalysis. This is the basis for cure. So the analyst, like Socrates, via the maiutics, brings the knowledge in the analysand, the knowledge of that they didn't know they have. Yeah. Just as Socrates did, going through the streets of Athens and chatting to people. And in those who professed of not knowing something, he in fact brought them to realize that they did in fact know stuff. And opposite to those others who profess that they do know, he brought them to realize that they didn't in fact. Yeah. That would be probably reflective of the difference of treatment of the hysteric and the obsessive, isn't it? Of the bearer of the hysteric discourse and the university discourse. However, in both cases, the certain S1, whether they do know or that they don't know, and the humility as the master signifier would be a cure. So, the main disjunction or difference that analyst knowledge is not a heady knowledge as a cognition, but the certain savoir, unconscious knowing that is arising. It is, of course, a knowing of the incomprehensible real, isn't it? No, the real of dukkha, the truth at that level, or discovered at that level, the process of the cure. In order for this knowledge to be brought about, the conscious knowledge of the university or of the ego must be symbolically castrated. And that's what the analytic process more often than not entails, symbolical castration of the master's knowledge. So, that's in short for the knowledge of the analyst. Now, let us look at the capitalist's knowledge, discourse. Yeah, and knowledge as well as desire. And differentiate it from the other discourses, as well as bringing out some kind of solution for that very much domineering discourse these days. To start with, capitalist discourse is a mutant of a master's discourse, and hence it needs to be written as a master's discourse with only two swaps in the position. So, as we know, in master's discourse, S1 is the agent. In capitalist discourse, S1 is the truth, just as it is in the university discourse. And that's actually what makes capitalist discourse and university discourse works together. Yeah. University discourse produces knowledge, which then is fetishized and crystallized into a commodity, which is to be produced and presented on the market. We'll get to that in a moment. But, as you might have guessed, in the position of the agent is subjective division. Yeah. So the arrow which has been pointing in all of the discourses upwards from the truth to the agent here points downwards. That's curious, isn't it? We'll get to that. The other, which is the other who's possessed of knowledge, is not treated at all, hence there is no arrow here. And the product is produced, same as with the master's discourse, great amount of discontent and the corporeal tension. And this arrow remains the same. The other is reduced to producing more discontent, basically. These arrows remain, hence the discourse repeats itself, just like others. Now, what's at stake within this discourse? Well, first of all, the disjunction of impossibility is circumvented, isn't it? Why? Well, because the other is not addressed whatsoever. What is addressed is in fact the unconscious truth. And how is it addressed? We'll see in a moment. So disjunction of the impossibility is foreclosed. Non-rapport is foreclosed. Non-rapport is foreclosed. The agent's message isn't aimed at the other. Instead, it treats the virtual truth of mastery from the position of a divided subject. Since the distance between jouissance and the subject is lost, the corporeal tension directly disturbs the agent. Distance is lost because the address to the other is missing. This tension is no longer processed through the other. Yeah? It directly invades upon the subject, thus making one run out or be consumed. Instead of addressing the other, what is provided are the solutions for discontent. And these solutions are, of course, S1, which are fetishized commodities to be found on the market. Products, services to be found on the market, and adjacent fantasy. Remember that arrow from surplus jouissance, the arrow of desire and fantasy? Fantasy of the completion that these commodities provide runs the game. Yeah. So we have these solutions which embody, via fetishizing, the illusion of completeness, self-sufficiency, vitality. But that's, of course, semblance, isn't it? Another crucial moment, I'll write it in red. Subjective division is denied. Instead, what we have is a fantasy of possibility of overcoming every kind of discontent via the correct kind of commodity or correct kind of service. Yeah. So the illusion persists that the real dukkha can be circumvented and treated and corrigible, rendered corrigible via just a correct asset to be attained, or correct service, or correct product. Yeah. What this is a rejection of symbolic castration. So within capitalist discourse, we talk about generalized perversion, which entails not seeing subjective division as structurally predetermined, but seen as a accidental discomfort which can be remedied via the commodities. Yeah. Accidental frustration. There is a fantasy, and that's the main fantasy for capitalism, a fundamental capitalistic fantasy that there is S1 for every discontent. Every kind of satisfaction can be found on the market at the correct time and place with the correct knowledge. And the knowledge within the capitalist discourse is the knowledge for solutions. And that knowledge runs off the knowledge of the university, of course. It's a specific enterprise, a certain innovation, which are continuously presented in the markets. Look at this new way of dealing with da 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 da. Look at this new product which can help you do da 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 da. Solutions are to be invented and to be presented, marketed, and sold. And acquired, obviously, and the fantasy persists that for every discontent there exists a solution. Yeah. So what sort of desire is then cultivated? It's a desire for continuous renewal of the sublime dimension of this S1, of the fetishized commodity. Yeah. Renewal of the sublime. We'll look in greater detail at how that happens within capitalist discourse in a moment. So, just a moment. As a result of running after this fantasy, what happens is exploitation of desire. Desire is exploited. Desire is turned into demand. Why? Well, because every kind of discontent is treated as the demand and is to be supplied. But desire is ephemeral, isn't it? It doesn't necessarily mean demand. However, within capitalist discourse, everything is treated as demand. Every nonsensical whim can produce a market, doesn't it? Which can be supplied via the commodities, which gives rise to this very famously popularized by Zizek, superego injunction to enjoy. Enjoy, says the capitalist. Superego. Enjoy. You can find any kind of commodities to treat your discontent. If you're feeling stupid, there is a whole market of knowledge. Universities, courses, programs, whatever. Embodiment of the real is one of them, by the way. It's in the capitalist discourse. Anyhow. To satisfy desire via the consumption, instead of treating non-specific structural result of subjective division as such, is the aim of capitalist discourse. I'll reiterate this. capitalist discourse aims at satisfying desire via consumption, rather than understanding desire as a structural inevitability of subjective division. Remember, subjective division is denied within capitalist discourse. Symbolic castration is foreclosed. Hence, as I said before, generalized perversion. Wonderfully perverted quality of capitalist marketing procedure. Desire, and this is nowhere else but in capitalist discourse where it comes to the fore. Desire is desire of the other, ultimately, of the other. Who is that other? Other of advertising, other of the media, other of celebrity, other which presents this product to you and promises that this product is going to complete you and make you full of vitality, and etc. Merchandise doesn't just satisfy your need, but renders you desirable by the other. That other who advertises that commodity will desire you if you have it. Subliminal message is such. And as I said before, S1 of commodity is linked to S2 of science. Commodity, science. And the science in this case works for S1 in order to produce, to invent new commodities, thus bringing about more S1, so that the market can be infused with new commodities. And the split subject can access all this on the condition of their faith that both science and marketed commodities can provide a solution for their inherent structural discontent. But remember, within capitalist discourse, structural discontent is denied. Yeah, it's seen as accidental frustration only. So what differs the capitalist discourse from the master's discourse is precisely that within master's discourse, master signifier is taken seriously. Yeah? Declarative decision or injunction of the master is to be obeyed or followed. Within capitalist discourse, subjective division is instead taken seriously. Why? Well, because it provides demand, which needs to be supplied on the market. Thus, bringing the whole machinery into motion. Instead, the subjective division is not seen as the structural impossibility or structural constant, really. Instead, it is seen as the permanent crisis to be rid of by means of commodities. As I have explained before, S1 renders that crisis no longer there, temporarily. Yeah, by means of acquiring commodity, subject can overcome the subjective division. No linkage to the other or to the social bond is needed, obviously, because one can directly access commodity on the market via a certain monetary value or exchange value. Corporeal tension, which subjective division produces, is fulfilled via commodities or experiences. That's another one. Experiences are popular now. Go for this retreat, for that journey, for that party, for I don't know. It's out there. The market is saturated. However, and that's the crux, the desired object obtained at the market for its exchange value is reduced immediately upon the purchase to its use value How do we write it down? Well, which produce a certain sobering up, yeah? Immediately after having been split of, or immediately after having been deprived of its glitter, which fetishizing creates. Marketing, advertising, celebrity product placement, all of that glitter creates the feeling of something sublime imbuing the commodity or the experience. As soon as it is obtained, the glitter is gone. It is reduced to a use value. And within use value, S1 is no longer S1. It's just another signifier within the S2, within the field of other signifiers. And thus no longer able to produce the end to discontent. Yeah, there is no arrow here. The arrow goes back here. It goes back to the subjective division. Ordinariness and emptiness dawn upon a consumer at this stage. After all, acquired commodity is just another size signifier amidst the cloud of all the other signifiers and doesn't really solve the issue. Yeah. This crisis here crisis of rediscovery of discontent. Discontent rediscovery is kind of paramount as what sets the machinery in motion. This is what amounts to surplus jouissance within the capitalist discourse. And that's, of course, object A. So the act of consuming produces discontent, which fuels more consumption. This is where the discourse loops into repetition once again, and again, again, again. Hence, the consumption persists and production, to satisfy consumption. However, it's all fun and good, but what happens is that the subject burns out, literally. Burnout is a biggie within this discourse. Subject burns out because of the lack of restraint upon the consumption. Due to foreclosure of the disjunction of impossibility, due to foreclosure of non-rapport, foreclosure of the structural understanding of subjective division, and the resultant generalized perversion, discontent is never taken as such, and the continuous repetition of the process gradually wears the subject out. Yeah, we'll look in a moment what does it lead to. The consumption does not really satisfy demand and desire, but exalt and exhaust the subject. The subject is haunted by an object A, by the corporeal tension. Corporeal tension continuously returns because the satisfaction only temporarily produces the state of non-division. Discontent returns from the outside once more, producing excess, which leads to burnout. And that manifests as very distinct kind of symptomatology, which is more on the actual pathological spectrum. Well, burnout, isn't it? It's already physically implied. Anxiety, panic attacks, addiction. One might kind of see how it is the case. This is the formula for addiction, isn't it? borderline states, which are actual pathological by nature, as you remember from the previous lecture. These symptoms are not something specific, they are reaction to the surplus jouissance which overwhelms due to structural denial of luck pertaining to the real of dukkha within capitalist discourse. Anytime the luck is denied, what's going to come to the fore is excess. Yeah. We see it in the psychotic subjectivities, we see it in perverted subjectivities. There is then a need to somehow modulate jouissance. And actually this kind of illustrates how capitalist discourse is supportive for fusion type subjectivities, isn't it? When what is at stake as regulation of this corporeal tension, yeah, new commodities, new experiences can be found on the market. So, in regards to the difference of the capitalist discourse with the hysterics discourse, the difference is that within capitalist discourse, the subject is not influenced by knowledge. Remember, within hysterics discourse, let's write it down again. That's the hysterics discourse. Here, the knowledge affects back the subject. Yeah. Within capitalist discourse, which is similar to hysterics discourse in a sense that the agent is also divided subject. Here S1. Here we have S2 and A. Due to the fact that knowledge doesn't influence the subject anymore, the subject is sort of dispossessed of knowledge. Yeah. Instead, what influences the subject is the corporeal tension all the time, which motivates one to seek for new solutions within the fetishized commodities. This renders everyone a proletarian within this discourse. Why? Well, because knowledge is no longer there. The knowledge of the fact that there is a real of dukkha, the subject abandons their responsibility for corporeal tension. Yeah, there's nothing really links the subject with the corporeal tension here, because the address to the us is no longer there, and tension simply invades the subject, producing the spectrum of actual pathological symptoms. Well, what we have here is the abandonment of responsibility for the real of dukkha and becoming dispossessed of the answer providing quality of structural knowledge. Yeah. It's not difficult to see how structural knowledge is absent. It's not liked within capitalist discourse. It's too complex. It bears down the fact that subjective division is something that cannot be remedied by the S1. Yeah. And that kind of undermines the whole fantasy that the commodity sold can actually provide the answer for the discontent. Oh well, that's no longer there. Having short-circuited the process of elaboration of object A through the other, via the address for the other, as Hysteric does here. At least Hysteric does it here, this is not done. Well, because this is not present, because other is not addressed, because introspection in regards to oneself is not done, what is done is the complex network of fulfillment of demand for satisfaction is done. Yeah, one only needs to look at all the schemas which marketing specialists employ in order to provide this sellability of a commodity. Yeah, they are complex. They are in many ways pinnacle of human mental capacities, but what it leads to, well, repetition of the same. Yes, of course, capitalist gains profit, but they lose their vitality to a certain extent. So within capitalist discourse, everyone is proletarian, because nobody really gains. Capitalist doesn't gain. More discontent simply invades upon the structure and causes the array of actual pathological symptoms to arise. So that's capitalist discourse. Well, what's the virtue of it? It makes things running. Within fusion type subjectivities, it makes jouissance manageable. All based through this short-lived moment of overcoming of the subjective division. But that's okay, it can be repeated in core. What's the solution from the analytic perspective? The solution for the imbroglio of capitalist discourse, the imbroglio of generalized perversion. The solution is the saint. The saint. So what we imply by the saint? A saint is someone who is detached. Yeah. Not someone who is compassionate and all loving and pure, but someone who is detached, to start with. Detached from the need to commodify jouissance, detached from jouissance itself. A certain refusal of jouissance is at stake for the saint. Yeah. If you look at practitioners of asceticism within Buddhist tradition, for example, it's precisely that. Jouissance is refused, sensuality is refused, detachment in regards to worldly attainments is practiced, detachment in regards to the body and the corporeal tension that it induces is practiced. But within the analytic clinic, the analyst's desire and analytic knowledge incarnate an object side of object A, meaning that side which is not fetishized, that side which is not glittering. Yeah? Thus, calling upon the lack, the rejected lack is called upon. Why the analyst's desire? Lack, of course, as per the real of dukkha. At the same time, analyst is not stirred by the fetishized object. So I can write here imperturbability. To object A. And they do not provide a solution for discontent. No solution. Remember, analyst doesn't provide S1 within the structure of analytic discourse, which is, I'll draw it somewhere. Agent is the object A, and it's the object side of object A, not the fetishized side. Knowledge in the position of the truth, which brings to the fore divided subject and results in the master signifier assumed by a subject themselves. But that S1 is not to be imposed or sold to the subject, as this is in the capitalist discourse. Then the non-rapport, the injunction of the importance of the discourse is taken into account. And instead of bringing the analysant, the subject, to develop in some kind of solution, we develop a symptom, which is the way to come to terms with lack. Accepting lack, let's say. And that's, of course, symbolic imaginary rendering, which renders Lac durable or endurable. Of course, within the analytic S2, as opposed to capitalist understanding that the subjective division is accidental and can be remedied via commodities, there lies structural understanding that the subjective division is structural. It's unavoidable. It's just there by definition. It's inherent to human existence. Is inherent to life. Regardless amount of commodities and experiences, subjective division is not going to go. Yeah, it can be rendered tolerable. That's what the word I was seeking. It can be rendered tolerable via symptom, but it cannot go away. It's just there. It's structural impossibility of its disappearance. Well, it's inherent to life and indicative of the unconscious. Indicative of the unconscious. Okay. So what all this does, and that's important, object A is installed into the position of a guarantee of subjective division. And stops being an anxiety-provoking cause of corporeal tension. So it's no longer seen as a melody or a permanent crisis to be get rid of by means of acquisition of things, status, whatever, objects, relationships, trophy husbands, trophy wives, cars, apartments, holidays, forever, you name it. But instead, the corporeal pressure is seen as structurally determining subjective division. And again, it can be accepted as such in that way. Within Buddhist terms, we would probably say that this amounts to dukkha satcha being accepted, truth of dukkha being accepted as such. The subject is continuously questioned in regards to the demand for the search of solution. Because that demand is, of course, the demand of the other, and that's demand of the, well, capitalistic other. Demand for solution is questioned. Why do we need these things? Why do you need to solve the issue of the subjective internal discontent? Why can't you just come to terms with it as such? That's the questions to be asked. This strips down the fundamental non-rapport, the impossibility of the discourse to provide any solution. And this is where we come to the fact that discourse is inadequate, any discourse really, to provide a final and permanent answer for discontent and for the real of dukkha. So here we kind of come back to the beginning, from where we started, from our theory of the drive. The real of dukkha is unsolvable on the permanent basis by any of the discourses, neither by the discourse of the master or the hysteric or the university discourse or the analytic discourse. Analytic discourse can provide as one, and it can provide structural knowledge, which is what we are exploring right here. Yeah. But it doesn't solve the real of dukkha as such, doesn't it? It can solve a symptom, it can help develop symptom, but it cannot solve the dukkha as such. That domain here is a domain of spiritual practice. Yeah, this fellow here pointing out that which is, I don't know, above, beyond, ineffable, is precisely that, the forsaken horizon of being that is to be known directly for themselves by those who dare to practice in the context of spiritual development. And their knowledge cannot be as such accommodated via the discourses. It can be shared, it can be expounded as the Dhamma, perhaps. And knowledge thus expounded does not make a loop of repetition. Yeah, it's just expounded, it just sounds. The Buddha just says, the Buddha just comes, the one who just came, who just said. It does not require an encore or once again or whatever. So that's about it for the discourse theory. Thank you.